Okay, we're continuing with chapter 23, and that video you should have watched before this from Professor Dave did a really good job explaining a lot of the stuff, and some of the stuff I'm going to go through today is just reiterating what he already said. But if you have two or more alleles for a locus, for a characteristic, you can end up, remember, with a diploid individual that's going to either be homozygous or heterozygous. And again, we talked about this. But if you have three characteristics like here, sometimes you don't get that. Okay, this is homozygous dominant for red. This is homozygous dominant for white, or homozygous recessive, for white. And what happens when you get a red and a white? Well, you get a pink. Well, that happens, okay? You can see a lot of variance in flowers. A lot of it comes from stuff like this. And the other thing is from the environment. If you think about it, different minerals in the soil. Maybe the pink isn't as vibrant. Maybe it's even more vibrant. So you've got characteristics like that that can change in populations. So the Heidi-Weinberg equation, the equation was in that video. It describes the genetic makeup that you expect in a population. Okay, it was what, p squared plus pq plus q squared equals 1. Okay, so it's a population, a way of predicting. Okay, in an observed genetic makeup of a population, if it differs from expectation, then you know there's genetic drift going on, there's something happening. Okay, so when you're doing the Hardy-Weinberg principle, that is for like a population that didn't have anything change it. There was no mutations, nothing like that occurred. Okay, so where the gametes contribute to the next generation randomly, like when we talked about Mendelian genetics, okay, the allele, the genotype, whatever, this equation works perfect. Okay, there's a constant in the frequencies, and that is, if it doesn't change, if you do the math and that it equals 1, like the equation, then you know that this population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Okay, so it's for hypothetical. Okay, this is for a population that isn't changing, that isn't evolving. Okay, in real populations, we have alleles and we have genotype frequencies that change over time. Okay, so they don't follow the rules of this equilibrium. Okay, there's 5 conditions for non-evolving populations that are rarely met. Okay, so this would be the ones that are in equilibrium. Okay, if all these things don't happen, then, or I guess do happen, then you're not going to get a change in the ratios. One, there's no mutations, which we know that won't occur. There is random mating. Sometimes you get populations. This has happened. I know if you're a big dog fan, when I was a kid, we had Dobermans, and Dobermans weren't a very popular breed. And then these crazy shows came on about the Doberman gangs, and they became really super, super popular. So people were mating them and they were inbreeding them, and there wasn't random mating anymore. And then we got all these ugly characteristics. And now I have Dobermans and I have to watch them for certain things that weren't around in the 70s and the 60s and 70s, because we've bred these characteristics. Hip dysplasia is one, if you have like the St. Bernard or German Shepherds. So all these things have cropped up because there is no random mating. No natural selection. Again, in nature, that's not going to happen. All right. If it's an extremely large population sizes, okay, and if there's no gene flow. So this is what, if all of this happen or doesn't happen, then you're going to stay in equilibrium, but we know that doesn't happen. Okay. So we got natural selection, we got genetic drift, and we have gene flow, and they alter the allele frequencies. Well, those are the 3 major things that can change population or make populations evolve: natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow. Okay, those are the 3 major factors that change the frequencies of genes. And again, natural selection takes time. It happens in individuals, and then it's eventually, if it's a characteristic that helps the population, it's passed on. Okay, genetic drift and gene flow, we'll talk about that. Genetic drift is just like it sounds, drifting into certain areas where you get isolated populations and so on. Okay, so we know natural selection is when you get success. There's some characteristic, some trait that allows them to survive better in their environment, and then you're going to get larger and larger populations that have that trait. Okay, here's one. It talks about resistance to DDT. Okay, DDT was used and used and used and used. It started, I think, in the 60s, and now it's outlawed because it actually almost killed off our bald eagles. But what happened is they'd spray it and most of the bugs would die, but the ones that didn't, they were resistant to it. Now they're going to have offspring that are resistant to it and resistant to it. And eventually you're going to get critters that don't die when they're sprayed with DDT. Okay. Natural selection can cause adaptive evolution, and it improves the organism and their environment. That's why it's carried on, because it does something to make it better. Okay. Genetic drift, what happens is you get a smaller sample. Okay. Because it's a smaller sample, you get a random size. And again, this is what I was talking about with dogs. We've got puppy mills where they breed brothers and sisters, and you get the same. You don't get that genetic variation, and then you end up with these deviations. Okay. It allows the allele frequencies to fluctuate unpredictably from one generation to another. And again, it reduces genetic variation because you start to lose alleles because of this small group instead of a larger group. Okay. So what happens with genetic drift? Genetic drift is significant in small populations. It can cause allele frequency to change at random. The genetic drift can lead to a loss of genetic variation. Again, you can end up with a characteristic that you don't want there, but now it's going to be proliferate and cause problems. And it can cause harmful alleles to become fixed. And this is a big one, like I was talking about with dog breeding. We have so many more issues with our dogs because of this small group breeding, not being conscious about what you were doing and just getting as many puppies as possible so you can make money instead of really being, taking care of the breed. Okay, gene flow consists of movement of alleles among populations. Okay, alleles can be transferred through the movement of fertile individuals from gametes like pollen. Okay, gene flow tends to reduce variation among populations over time. Okay, so gene flow can increase the fitness of a population if it's a good characteristic. Okay, they're talking about the spread of alleles for the resistance to insecticides. Okay, so you have this group that's resistant to insecticides, and they pass it on to more populations, and pretty soon you have a lot of bugs that are resistant to insecticides. Insecticides have been used to target mosquitoes because we know mosquitoes carry a lot of nasty stuff, West Nile, malaria, that kind of stuff. But the alleles have evolved in some of these populations, and now they're resistant to these insecticides. So we can't get rid of them, and now we got more West Nile and more malaria. Okay. The flow in insecticide resistance in allele population, again, can increase the fitness of those mosquitoes. Okay. So it causes problems. With West Nile, I know West Nile is up, but malaria's, we still have over 1 million people every year that die from malaria. It's a horrible. And again, we can't get rid of those mosquitoes because we have this gene flow. Okay, so when you're looking at populations, okay, we have directional, we have disruptive, and we have stabilizing selection. Okay, so there's 3 modes of selection. Directional favors an individual at one extreme. Okay, again, with the insecticide, the ones that survive versus the ones that don't survive. Okay. Disruptive is at the whole range. Okay, so when we're looking at directional, it's in one direction. It's either at the low end or the high end when you're talking about whatever your phenotype range is. Disruptive is it affects basically all of them. Okay, and again, these are things that change the population. Okay, so we have directional, disruptive, and stabilizing. Stabilizing favors an intermediate. Okay. One of the things he talked about was the development of wings, and it has to happen over intermediate variance. It happens over time. Okay. Okay. So the key role in natural selection is the adaptive evolution. Okay. Natural selection, remember, happens in individuals, and then it's passed on and more and more and more, and it helps them adapt. Okay. There has been very striking adaptations because of natural selection. Wings. Okay. Animals lived in the water. All organisms lived in the water. How did they get out of the water? And once they got on land, how were they allowed to fly? Okay. Here they talk about octopuses can change their color rapidly for camouflage. Okay, the jaws of a snake, they can actually dislocate their jaw. Have you ever seen a snake eat something that's way too big for its mouth? Because they can dislocate their jaw. Okay, here's an example. They actually have a tendon that comes undone, and so they can open up that mouth and eat that whole. I mean, there's no way they should be able to swallow that because this ligament comes undone. They can do that. That was an adaptation. It was, happened in a few and they passed it on, and pretty soon snakes can all do that. Okay, so natural selection increases the frequency that the alleles, because they're more likely to survive, they're going to pass that on to the next generation. The ones that can't do it aren't going to survive as well, and eventually it'll take over. So adaptive evolution occurs as a match between the species and the environment. That's really what happens, is natural selection, some trait comes out and they survive better, and then they pass it on. Okay, because the environment can change, adaptive evolution is continuous process. It's a big thing. And colors, you'll see that sometimes with moths. They used to be white colored, they'd blend in, and then we had the Industrial Revolution and things got a little dirty, and so then the white moths got eaten, but the ones that were darker didn't. They're changing their colors and stuff, and so they're camouflaged. Okay, so genetic drift and genetic flow do not constantly lead to adaptive evolution. Okay, they can increase and decrease, and it's not really the environment that changes it. Okay, one of the things we have is sexual selection is a natural process. It can result in what they call sexual dimorphism. It's a marked there's a big difference between the boys and the girls. And again, the boys usually are brightly colored. If you look at birds, they have all these pretty colors. They have to attract a mate, so they got to look all pretty. Okay, and it happens in birds. It happens in fish. The males are prettier. They have more colors, because they have to attract that lady. Okay, so the intrasexual selection is direct competition. Okay, the males have to get the female to come on over to their harem. Okay, interselection, often called a mate choice. Okay, this is where the female gets to choose. Okay, with this one, the males, they mate. They have direct competition, and in this one, the females get a choice. So in both cases, they can use the flashiness, but this one, there might be some fighting going on, whereas this one, the girls just get to go, I like that one. Okay, so we have male showiness, and again, it's due to a mate choice. It can increase a male's chances of attracting a female, and that's where you get that dimorphism coming in. The boys have to attract the girls. Okay, so again, we're done with that chapter. You've got a simulation to do, and then we got one more, and then we're done.